Welcome to another Cup of Joe. I'm your host, Joe Tumalo, CEO of PG Partner. Welcome back, Casey Summar. Thank you so much for coming back.
My pleasure. Good to be here, Joe.
Awesome. Love that mug. Can we see that in
Yeah,
case people haven't seen it yet?
right. There's our handmade Alaskan pottery, right? Little fish.
Do you have a name for
Never gotten there now.
it? Too much on your plate.
No,
So
no.
today's Cup of Joe is unique for us because we have never really done anything for donors, right? So we're going to, so our audience, if you want to share these, if helpful, with your board members or donors, talking about the 990s. What does, silly question, but what does 990 stand for anything? I mean, I've heard it forever, but
Right. Just the tax form number assigned. Yeah, nothing exciting. I know every once in a while they have the opportunity to assign a particular number to the form, right, that like corresponds to the statute. No, it's just the 990. Yeah. And that is your annual tax return for nonprofit organizations. Almost all of them, except private foundations, which file a variation called the 990 PF. But most file your form 990 with the IRS.
right. Just 501c3s, correct?
Nope, actually,
Oh,
all types of 501c, yeah, 4, 5, 6, 7, etc., all file the same form.
okay. And you're going to share one and kind of go through it, and because
Let's do
I'm curious when you sent me ideas for topics, I'm like, why would a donor want to look at this? I'm setting you up.
Right. Well, I thought of this from a couple perspectives, which is both for donors, but also for board. If you're on a board, right, you're going to get sent the 990 for the organization. They often say, review this, be sure everything, let us know if you have any comments. And I know, many board members I've served with that they don't spend all day with tax forms like I do. Their eyes kind of glaze over. They have no idea what they're looking for or what would be meaningful. So I thought in our brief time together, we could spend hours with the 990, but I won't. I thought in our brief time together, we could just hit some highlights of, what are those things that you might look for just, right, as a donor when you're reviewing this? Because the 990 was actually completely redone a few years ago with donors in mind. So the idea being, let's not make this just a tool for the IRS. These are required to be disclosed publicly. So let's make it useful for donors and let's highlight what's important to donors. So a couple of big changes that happened with that. You've got your basic information about the organization here, but right here, part 1, question 1, briefly describe the organization's mission or most significant activity. So it's front and center now than it used to be. So that's a great place to start, is understand not just what you know the organization for, but what is it telling its regulators, what is it telling you as its donors that it does, or that its most significant activities are. So you can often learn a lot just right there from that first question. And then you've got some really interesting data here as well about who is the board made up of. Are there, independent voting members? Usually want to see at least a majority of the board being independent for most, public charities. Volunteers, and then you've got, some other income information about different types of income. And then just, again, right here on page 1, you've got a pretty good idea of the organization's financial health, right? So how are they doing this year compared to last year? What is their total contribution portfolio looking like? Or do they earn revenue perhaps? Maybe it's a museum or university that has program service revenue. And then you see where they're spending their money. Are they making grants? Are they, paying, is it going mostly to salaries or professional fundraisers or other expenses? So really great snapshot just right here and what's going on with their overall assets, liabilities, net, boom, right out of the box. So, even if you just glance at page 1, I think you would get a lot out of it.
Excuse
But
me. I'm
yeah,
sorry. Can you go
yeah,
back to this? I saw the one line that said employee benefits. Where was that?
yeah, salaries, compensation, other employee
Employee
benefits.
benefits. What is the employee? I mean, I know what employee benefits are, but how is that measured and how is that relevant to this?
Yeah. So what it's trying to do here is to say, we want to see total compensation. We want to really understand kind of how much of the overall expenses are going toward employees. So this is totaled together, and then later in the detailed financial information, it will actually break it out to show you kind of what is salary versus other compensation
Oh,
versus
okay.
benefits.
Thank you.
Yeah. Yeah, so this is kind of the big picture. And then the other page that I think is often super important for donors is part 3. So part 3 is all about program service accomplishments. And this should be the charity's sales pitch, right? So this is the opportunity to tout your accomplishments, right? Like what an amazing opportunity to tell donors, this is what we did with your money this year. This is what we accomplished. I often see this section being written by the CPAs, and I have many dear friends who are CPAs. But this is not the time, right, to have your CPA write that narrative for you. This should be coming from the donor, from development staff. It should be compelling. It should be not, you shouldn't be using the same thing year after year, right? So it shouldn't just be, we have blah, 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 XYZ program, right? Tell those accomplishments, make it exciting and celebrate what you've done. And so it should describe here not just the overall mission, but also by program, different programs, the expenses for those programs, and what you accomplished this year. And a cool thing is you'll see the Schedule O that you see referenced, here and here, Schedule O, Schedule O, Schedule O. Schedule O is an attachment that can be attached that includes narratives that don't fit in the boxes here. So again, another great place. I usually if I'm just skimming, I kind of skim here. I'll show you a couple other things I look at, and then I go all the way to the end and I read the Schedule O, because you can find some really interesting narrative there about an organization.
Do you have to fill in every, does it have to be complete? I mean, would they get away with not filling in everything?
It should be. This is one of those where you want to put this information out there, right? So I would think you should, unless some organizations really may have just a single program. So then you would just have one. That would be fine. But otherwise, yeah, the entire form is expected to be completed. So all these little check boxes. So again, this is another one of those areas where people just kind of start to skim over. All these different check boxes are basically saying, do you have a particular type of activity that requires more reporting? So you'll note almost all of these say like, if yes, complete this schedule, that schedule, that schedule, that schedule. So these are, this does start to get a little bit more into the weeds. More sophisticated donors might be interested in learning more about, the different kind of assets that they're holding, or more complex structures, lobbying they're engaged in, things like that. So there's a lot of interesting things to be gleaned here. And typically this entire checklist is all going to tell you, what additional schedules might need to be included. So in the interest of time, I won't go through them in detail, but they're interesting, they're useful, and they can tell you a lot about an organization. So part 5, though, this can be a little more helpful, I think, for donors. The first section is about compliance. So essentially what it's doing is saying, how many employees did you report? Like, were they properly filed? Did you file all of your employment returns? For donations, did you file your required substantiation? Did you give donors a receipt for all the letters, etc.? So this is good guidance for organizations. So this was another reframe of the 990 was, let's sort of word questions in such a way that they might highlight for the organization things they should be doing that are a best practice. You can kind of tell the way many of these questions are framed that you should be saying yes, right? So it's, did you provide, did you receive any of these payments? If yes, did you notify the donor the value? Did you, right? You can tell that you're supposed to be saying yes, which might cause the board or staff or professionals for an organization to ask those questions, explore, and have an opportunity to be compliant. So lots of good kind of seeds here. And then my other favorite section is, as a nonprofit governance nerd, is this part 6, right? So this is all about the governance of the organization. So tells you more about the makeup of the board. Again, more of these questions that you can tell you're probably supposed to answer yes. Like, did you contemporaneously document meetings? Meaning, are you preparing minutes from your board meetings? Again, you want to be able to say, yes, we're doing that, right? These are all our best practices. They ask a lot about different policies. Do you have a whistleblower policy? Again, it's kind of a hint. Don't you think you should have a whistleblower policy, right? So a good list here of different, good policies, procedures, and organizations should file. So I do think of this section as really a checklist that you want to be able to confirm, like, yes, we're doing all of these things. And as a donor, I can view that and know, yes, this organization has good governance practices, they're compliant, and they're set up for success, right? To avoid the type of issues that can plague organizations. I'll highlight just a couple more because I really could go all day with the 990. But this is another really interesting section, part 7, and this is where you learn about compensation. So you were asking Joe before, right, about that kind of lump line of compensation, benefits, etc. Well, this is one of the places that it gets into more granular detail. So here, you should see a name of every member of the board, which are typically all volunteers. You're also going to see the officers, as well as key employees or other highly compensated employees or contractors. So you get all that information here, reportable compensation, et cetera, including reportable compensation from like related organizations. So sometimes you have an interlocking organization. So this is where you see the whole picture of someone's compensation. So lots of good data here for donors to understand, where their money is going, and also for charities themselves, right, to understand kind of comparable, what other folks are being paid for similar roles. So that's another really important section there about our contractors. And then, yeah, there's a couple others to highlight here. This is where we get into more granular detail about revenue. So page 1 is just those big lump lines about contributions, et cetera. I usually do like to come take a peek here and just try to understand, oh, is there funding coming from, government grants primarily, or from contributions? And the reason that might be important to me as a donor is it can help you understand not just their business model, but also risk, right? So if all of the funding is coming from, one government grant, well, that could be risky. What is the security of that organization? So it's helpful to sort of see, do they have diverse revenue sources? And, how sustainable are they? So lots of good information about revenue here. Yeah, and then this is going to be the flip side of that on expenses, right? So where you're going to get more granular to understand, okay, if they're making grants, who are they making grants to? Is it international grants, domestic grants? Let's learn more about compensation, other expenses, professional fees. Let's get into that. And this is another really cool thing for donors here, is that it breaks out those expenses. You see these columns at the top into program service expenses, management, or fundraising, right? So this is where you can really understand the functional expenses, meaning, so let's say we just had that lump line of salaries. Well, I don't know if those salaries are for people that are maybe frontline program staff, or is it all administration? And that might feel different to me as a donor, right? I might be more inclined to to be supporting an organization that is, kind of lean in terms of its management and fundraising, that's really putting the lion's share toward programming. It's definitely more art than science. So, I always sort of caution organizations, make sure you understand kind of why and how organizations are completing this, because there's a temptation, I think, for organizations to kind of put everything in the program service expenses. So I also am suspicious if there are no fundraising expenses or no management expenses, right? Like you have to have a balance. There should be a balance. So yeah, so lots of good intel there. And then I think just the last highlight, then you got the balance sheet, which again just tells you about the fiscal health of the organization. How much cash do they have on hand? Is there any debt? And again, you want to drill down into the schedules, understand what's going on with it. That's not necessarily a bad thing, but understand what's going on with it. So you can learn so much about an organization from so that's the main heart of the 990. Of course, many of them can be 100 pages long by the time you add on all the schedules and detail. But if you just get familiar with some of those main sections, that first page, program service accomplishments, the governance piece of things, gives you some really nice insight into an organization, and you'll start to find yourself getting pretty comfortable reviewing them and comparing organizations.
It's great. Now, it's a silly question, but maybe there is an answer. Is there any reason why some of the boxes are gray and some are blue, or it's not a system?
Some of them are grayed out if they're not applicable. So like, I think, for example, like on the statement of functional expenses, the grayed out here is that a grant paid to another organization could never be a management expense or a fundraising expense. Yeah, so it's not an option. Yeah. Similarly, you see they've blocked out professional fundraising services. We can't call that a program service expense. It's a fundraising expense, And again, sometimes there's this perception that you don't want to have any or as little as possible fundraising expense. I just want to see proportional, right? I want to see that the expenses being paid are yielding contributions. That's what I want to see as a donor. Again, if I see nothing, that doesn't make sense to me, right? Because unless it's an all volunteer organization, there's somebody driving that, and I love to see good professionals being well compensated, stewarding an organization. So, you don't want to see nothing there. But yeah, that's what that's
There was a book, I remember a guy, I can't think of it, just remembered it, thinking of it years ago about the ratio of expenses versus money raised, how much is actually, and everybody talks about, oh, we need it to be less than 10%, whatever the number is. And his whole point was, okay, what if this charities was less than 10%, but they really weren't having an impact on the people they serve? This charity was 20%, but they were just helping so many people, right?
Exactly, right. And it can go to sustainability, having staff that are well compensated, stay with the organization, have seniority. Those are all great things for sustainability and impact, right? So, and also because, but yes, I know exactly what you're talking about. There's kind of that overhead myth, and then people really started to unpack that. So yes, I always take this, part 9, the statement of functional expenses, with a grain of salt, and ask, does it make sense? Is it providing me with helpful information? But we see examples that can really skew things. Let's say you want to support, cancer research, and you're looking at 2 organizations that look very similar, but one of them puts all of their researchers' time and program services expenses. One of them is kind of more thoughtfully allocating their time if some are involved in management. It might make it look like, the one is kind of doing better, being more efficient with your dollars, where they might actually be, yielding similar or worse results. So you always want to understand what's going into those numbers, for sure.
Right. Incredibly helpful as always. I do have one quick question. Just from a donor standpoint, it seems like I'll go on a website and there's the most recent 990 is like 2 or 3 years ago. I just seem to see that a lot. Any idea why? Is it?
Yeah, so a couple of reasons for that. It can take a good bit of time to kind of close out a fiscal year. And so, let's say your fiscal year ends June 30th, then your 990 would be due 5.5 months after that. So usually November 15th is a big filing deadline, in addition to May 15th. But many have to get an automatic 6-month extension. It is automatic. Everyone is granted it if requested. And the reason would be that you need a little more time. For example, if you have to have your financial statements audited, you might need more time to get them audited, and then you want to wait to prepare your 990 to ensure that it matches those returns. Let's just go back to the top really quick to note. At the top here, you'll see it'll tell you the date the tax year is beginning and ending for, so that you can kind of navigate those fiscal years. And so yeah, you will see that often. The IRS, if you're looking at the IRS's website, they are probably the slowest to get to upload, so they're always going to be a little delayed. Often state charity regulators may be a little faster, and some of them, like here in California, those returns are all online now. So often if I don't see the return on the IRS site, I'll go check with the state regulator. They're often there. Or there are great websites like Candid, which has the guidestar.org, where you can find them for free as well. They tend to be more current too, because organizations will upload them as soon as they have them, because they want to keep those great ratings on, Charity Navigator, GuideStar, all of those. So those are really, helpful tools as well.
Great. So thank you. So this was we designed it for the donors, but from the fundraisers charity standpoint, should we be promoting our 990s more to do it to our donors?
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so I like to think of it from the donor's perspective, because that's how you should be reviewing your 990. So whether you're a board member or a staff member or, a consultant to a charity, when looking at those 990s, you do have meaningful input, right? And so I think often people kind of look at this as a financial document, I'll just leave it to the finance folks. And I think that's a mistake, because this should be a fundraising tool. It should position the organization well. It's going to be one of your most public documents that is out there. And it's permanent, right? They're always out there. You can't, you can amend a 990, but again, it's not typically done. So I always, really want to make sure you're taking time and care. We often review them for our clients too, to just, again, make sure it's all cohesive and that governance information is correct and matches what's in their bylaws and their policies. So you want it to all tell a cohesive story. And if you can get your whole team involved in doing that, it'll really serve the organization well.
Great. When and how can people get in touch with you, Casey?
Thank you, Joe. So the law firm for nonprofits, we do reach coast to coast. We're a small team, but we have folks in every time zone. So we welcome charities all across the country to reach out with questions about compliance and best practices and any kind of nonprofit or tax exempt law questions. Best place to find us is on our website, which is LFNP, as in law firm, nonprofit, lfnp.com. Check it out. It'll share more about what we do, and would love to hear from you and be helpful if we can.
Thank you. And do you ever work with directly with donors or just the charities?
We primarily work with charities, but we do sometimes work with donors, particularly if they're looking to make a major gift or certainly, many of our clients are private foundations that are, grant makers and donors, right? So sometimes we're helping them, but potential recipients of charitable funds. So we can be, involved in kind of both sides of those. Yeah.
Lovely. Thank you as always, Casey.
My pleasure, Joe. Thank you.
You will. Thanks.